The air in that courtroom felt recycled, like it had been breathed too many times by too many anxious people. I sat at the defendant's table with my lawyer, a competent woman named Judith who told me 3 times that morning to keep my expression neutral. The wood grain of the table had a knot that looked like an eye, and I found myself staring at it, while the murmurs rolled through the gallery behind me. I could feel their judgment without turning around. In their minds, I'd already been convicted. The story had been told, retold, and accepted as fact 6 months before we ever walked through these doors. Across the aisle, Vanessa sat with perfect posture, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She wore a navy dress that made her look smaller than she was, more vulnerable. Her attorney, a man named Goldstein who specialized in workplace harassment cases, had a leather portfolio thick with printouts, screenshots, emails, witness statements. Everything she'd prepared, every lie she'd engineered. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Hoffman, was reviewing something on her bench, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. The bailiff stood near the side door, arms crossed, looking bored. This was just another case to everyone here. Just another he said, she said, that had already been decided by public opinion. Goldstein stood and began his opening statement, his voice measured and sympathetic. He painted Vanessa as a victim who'd finally found the courage to speak up, who'd endure months of inappropriate advances and financial manipulation before documenting everything and coming forward. He held up printed messages, the ones she doctored, though he didn't know that yet, and let them speak for themselves. The judge nodded along. Someone in the gallery coughed. I felt Judith's hand touch my forearm briefly, a reminder not to react. Then the side door opened, not dramatically, just a quiet turn of the handle and a soft creak of hinges. A man in a gray suit walked in carrying a single manila folder and a laptop case. He wasn't tall or imposing, just ordinary, late 40s, receding hairline, wire-rimmed glasses. He nodded to Judith and took a seat in the front row behind our table. Goldstein paused mid-sentence, glancing back. Vanessa's eyes followed the movement, and for just a second, less than a second, I saw her posture shift. Not much, just enough. Judge Hoffman looked over her glasses. "Counselor, do you need a moment?" Goldstein cleared his throat. "No, Your Honor." I was simply, he continued, but his rhythm had broken. The investigator opened his folder and began reviewing pages with a yellow highlighter, utterly calm, utterly focused. The room felt different now, like someone had adjusted the temperature by a single degree. Vanessa whispered something to Goldstein. He whispered back without looking at her. I remembered, sitting there watching her confidence flicker, how it really began, how none of them knew what I knew, how silence had been my only weapon until it wasn't anymore. That's when I understood the waiting had been worth it. It started with a text message I wasn't supposed to see. March 14th, a Tuesday evening. I'd been working late on the Riverside project, the one that would either make or break our small consulting firm, and I came home around 9 to find Vanessa's phone face up on the kitchen counter. Screen still lit. She was in the shower. The message preview showed a name I didn't recognize, Kyle, and the words, "He doesn't suspect anything." I stood there holding my keys, listening to the water run, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I didn't touch her phone. I just stood there until the screen went dark, then walked to the bedroom and changed clothes like I hadn't seen it. The next few weeks played out in fractional shifts, small distortions that I might have missed if I hadn't been watching. She started working later, taking calls in her car before coming inside. Our shared calendar, the one we'd maintained religiously for 3 years, suddenly had gaps. Evenings marked as client dinner or team meeting with no details. When I asked about her day, her answers came too quickly, too practiced. She'd always been spontaneous with stories, adding unnecessary details and tangents. Now everything was efficient, edited. I found myself cataloging inconsistencies the way I track project timelines at work, noting discrepancies in a mental ledger I couldn't quite justify keeping. In early April, She told me she needed to handle some financial restructuring for her mother's estate. Paperwork, meetings with lawyers, boring administrative work. She asked me to sign a power of attorney form so she could manage some of our joint accounts more easily during the process. It made sense on the surface. Her mother had passed 2 years earlier, and estate issues could drag on forever. I signed at the kitchen table while she made coffee, and she kissed the top of my head and told me I was making everything so much easier. The document went into her briefcase. I never saw it again. By May, the cracks had widened enough that other people noticed. My business partner, Graham, asked if everything was okay at home because Vanessa had called the office 3 times asking detailed questions about our client contracts and revenue projections. Our neighbor, Mrs. Cho, mentioned seeing Vanessa leaving the house at odd hours, sometimes meeting someone in a silver sedan 2 blocks down. When I confronted Vanessa about it, she didn't get defensive. She got concerned. She asked if I was feeling stressed, if the Riverside project was getting to me, if maybe I should talk to someone about my anxiety. Her voice was so steady, so caring, that for a moment I doubted my own observations. The real fracture came on a Saturday in late May. I'd taken my laptop to a coffee shop to work in peace, and when I logged into our shared cloud storage to access some files, I saw a folder I didn't recognize. It was labeled documentation and dated from the past 3 months. Inside were screenshots, messages that appeared to be from me, sent to Vanessa at strange hours, sexually explicit demands, threats about money, statements about controlling her access to our accounts. My name was attached to every one of them, my profile picture, my phone number, except I'd never written any of them. The timestamps showed messages sent while I was in client meetings, while I was on a flight to Denver, while I was asleep next to her. I sat in that coffee shop with my hands flat on the table, forcing myself to breathe normally. A couple at the next table was laughing about something. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled. Outside, someone's dog barked twice and then stopped. I took screenshots of everything with my phone, then closed the laptop and walked home in 40-degree rain without my jacket. When I got back, Vanessa was sitting on the couch with her friend Lauren, both of them drinking wine. They looked at me like I was interrupting something important. Lauren left 10 minutes later with a long hug and a whispered "be safe" that I wasn't supposed to hear. That night, lying in bed while Vanessa slept or pretended to sleep beside me, I understood what was happening. She wasn't leaving me. She was building a case against me. Every careful lie, every planted document, every concerned question to my colleagues. She was constructing a narrative where I was the villain, and she was the victim who'd finally found the courage to expose me. And judging by Lauren's expression, by Graham's awkward questions, by the cold distance I'd started feeling from people who'd known me for years, her story was already being believed. I stopped trying to explain myself after the first 3 attempts went nowhere. Graham listened to my account of the forged messages with his arms crossed, nodding in a way that meant he wasn't really listening. He suggested I take some time off, get my head straight, maybe see someone about stress management. My sister called that same week after Vanessa had apparently reached out to her with concerns about my behavior. Erratic mood swings, financial obsession, controlling tendencies. My own sister asked me, very gently, if I considered therapy. When I tried to show her the timestamps, the impossibilities, she looked at my phone screen with the kind of patience you'd show a confused child and said that sometimes we don't see our own patterns clearly. The withdrawal wasn't a choice so much as a recognition of futility. You can't argue against a story that's already been accepted as truth. Every denial sounds like defensiveness, every piece of evidence like desperation. So I stopped presenting my case to people who'd already reached their verdict. I stopped going to the Wednesday basketball games with the guys from the office. I stopped attending Graham's backyard barbecues. I stopped calling friends who'd suddenly become busy every weekend. The silence I built around myself wasn't defeat. It was strategy, though I didn't quite understand that yet. My days compressed into routines that required no human interaction. I woke at 5:30, made coffee, worked from home on the projects Graham was still willing to assign me. Smaller accounts now, nothing client-facing. I ordered groceries online. I went to the gym at 6 in the morning, when it was mostly empty except for retirees on treadmills. I ate lunch at my desk. Vanessa had moved out by mid-June, citing an unsafe environment, staying with Lauren while she figured things out. The house felt larger without her, rooms echoing in ways they hadn't before. I found myself grateful for the space. What I did during those long, quiet weeks was document everything. I created a spreadsheet with every interaction, every phone call, every timeline discrepancy. I went through 3 years of bank statements and found transfers I'd authorized but didn't remember. Small amounts at first, $50 or $100. Then larger sums moved to accounts I couldn't access. The power of attorney I'd signed had given her more control than I'd understood. I pulled our text message history and compared it against the screenshots in her folder, noting where words had been changed, where context had been removed, where entire exchanges had been fabricated from pieces of real conversation stitched together. I backed everything up in 3 places. Printed copies went into a fireproof box in my closet. Digital files went to an encrypted cloud service. I kept a 3rd set on an external hard drive that I stored in a safety deposit box at a bank across town. This wasn't paranoia. It was documentation. The same process I'd use for any complex project with moving parts and uncertain variables. I treated my own life like a case study, removed and analytical. Emotion would come later, if there was room for it. Right now, there was only data. The hardest part wasn't the isolation. It was watching her move freely through the world I'd been exiled from, seeing her post photos with our mutual friends, reading the careful comments people left. "You're so brave and proud of you for speaking up." She'd started a crowdfunding page for legal fees and counseling, and had raised $6,000 in 2 weeks. People I'd known for years had contributed. She thanked them publicly. Each post a masterclass in vulnerable strength. I read every word without commenting, screenshotting each one, adding them to the folder labeled Public Statements. By July, I'd lost 12 pounds without trying. My reflection looked different. Sharper angles, darker circles under my eyes, a kind of stripped-down quality that comes from living without pretense. I bought better locks for the doors. I set up a security camera that covered the front porch and driveway. I saved every voicemail she left, each one sweeter than the last, asking for the talk, suggesting mediation, wondering if I was taking care of myself. Her concern was almost convincing if you didn't listen for the assumptions underneath, that I was the one who needed fixing, that she was extending grace to someone broken. In early August, Graham called to tell me that Vanessa's lawyer had sent a letter to the firm threatening legal action for my alleged misuse of company resources for personal harassment. The letter cited emails I had supposedly sent from my work account, messages that would create liability for the business. Graham's voice was tired when he said he'd need to put me on administrative leave pending an investigation. I told him I understood. I didn't argue. I thanked him for calling personally and hung up. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I stared at it. The house was completely silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the occasional car passing outside. I could have broken then. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched for private investigators in the area, writing down names and phone numbers in careful block letters, my handwriting steady and precise. The diner was called Rosie's, a worn-down place on the east side, where the booze had duct tape on the vinyl, and the coffee tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning. I'd chosen it because it was far from anywhere Vanessa or her friends would go, a neighborhood of machine shops and warehouses where no one looked twice at 2 men having a quiet conversation. The investigator's name was Tom Briggs, and he arrived exactly on time, sliding into the booth across from me with a leather portfolio and a handshake that was firm but not aggressive. He ordered black coffee and a slice of cherry pie he didn't touch. I gave him everything. The timeline, the forged screenshots, the bank transfers, the metadata inconsistencies. I showed him my documentation, the spreadsheet, the backed-up messages, the timestamps that proved I couldn't have sent what she claimed I'd sent. He listened without interrupting, making occasional notes in a pocket-sized notebook with a mechanical pencil. When I finished, he sat back and looked at me for a long moment, studying my face the way you'd study a piece of evidence. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Do you want to prove you're innocent, or do you want to prove she's guilty? I thought about it. Both, I said. He nodded. Good. That I can work with. The investigation took shape slowly, methodically. Tom had contacts, a forensic tech specialist who could analyze digital metadata, a financial investigator who traced money movement, a paralegal who knew how to pull court records without raising flags. Within 2 weeks, he confirmed what I already suspected. The screenshots in Vanessa's folder had been created using editing software, composites made from real messages with words changed, timestamps manipulated, context removed. The tech specialist provided a report with side-by-side comparisons showing pixel inconsistencies, font irregularities, metadata stamps that didn't match carrier records. It was technical, irrefutable, and exactly what we needed. The financial trail was even more revealing. Vanessa had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into a personal account I'd never known existed, using the power of attorney to authorize transfers that looked legitimate on paper. Small amounts at first, testing whether I'd notice, then larger sums, for 1,000 here, 7,000 there. By Tom's calculation, she'd moved almost $43,000 over 8 months. But more interesting were the payments going out from that account. $500 to a graphic designer who specialized in social media content, $1,200 to someone named Kyle Pemberton, the name from that first text message, and regular payments to Lauren for what the memo line called consulting services. Tom showed me all of this in the same booth at Rosie's 3 weeks after our first meeting, laying out printed bank statements and annotated screenshots like he was building a puzzle. She didn't do this alone, he said, tapping Kyle's name. This guy works in IT security. Ironic, right? He's probably the one who helped her fabricate the digital evidence. And Lauren, he flipped to another page. She's been coordinating with an HR representative at your firm named Judith Brennan. Wait, no. He checked his notes. Angela Morrison. They've been having lunch twice a week since April. He looked up at me. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. The realization settled over me like cold water. It hadn't been just Vanessa. It had been a coordinated effort, multiple people working together to construct a narrative so complete, so detailed, that questioning it would seem unreasonable. They'd built redundancy into the lies. If one piece fell apart, others would hold. If I challenged the screenshots, there were witness statements. If I questioned the witnesses, there were financial records. Every angle had been covered except one. They'd assumed I wouldn't fight back intelligently. They'd counted on me being either too emotional or too broken to mount a methodical defense. Over the next month, Tom and I built our counter-narrative. We didn't just collect evidence. We anticipated their responses, prepared for every deflection, documented every inconsistency. Tom interviewed 3 of Vanessa's former co-workers who'd witnessed her fabricating a harassment complaint against a manager 2 years earlier, something that had been quietly settled with an NDA. He found the graphic designer who created the fake message screenshots, a freelancer who kept all the original files, and was willing to testify once he understood what they'd been used for. He traced Lauren's payments back to Vanessa's hidden account, establishing a clear financial connection between co-conspirators. By late September, we had enough. Tom compiled everything into a binder, evidence tabs color-coded, witness statements notarized, forensic reports indexed. It was 3 inches thick, organized with the precision of a legal brief. We met one final time at Rosie's, and he slid it across the table to me. This is their story, he said, tapping the binder. And this is what actually happened. The question now is whether you want to settle quietly or take this to court. I looked at the binder. at months of work compressed into documented truth. Outside, the afternoon sun cut through the diner's grimy windows, throwing long shadows across our booth. "Court," I said. "I want everyone to hear it." Tom smiled, just barely. "Then we file tomorrow." The hearing was scheduled for October 23rd, a Thursday morning that started with fog thick enough to soften the edges of buildings. I arrived early with Judith, my attorney, not the one Vanessa had befriended at my firm, and we sat in the corridor outside the courtroom watching lawyers and plaintiffs drift past with their own burdens of proof. Vanessa arrived at 9:15 with Goldstein and Lauren, the three of them moving like a practice unit, confident in their choreography. She wore that navy dress, the one that made her look smaller, and she didn't look at me once while we waited. Lauren whispered something to her that made her nod. Goldstein reviewed his notes with the concentration of someone who'd already won. When we filed into the courtroom, I felt the weight of the gallery behind us. Vanessa's supporters, people I'd known, people who'd chosen sides without hearing mine. Tom sat in the first row behind our table, with his manila folder and laptop case, the same setup he brought that first day. Judge Hoffman took her seat and asked if both parties were ready to proceed. Goldstein stood and said they were. Judith stood and said we were. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenograph keys, waiting. Goldstein's opening painted Vanessa as a woman who'd endured months of escalating abuse, emotional manipulation, financial control, sexual harassment, before finally gathering the courage to document everything and come forward. He presented the screenshots she'd prepared, blown up on poster boards so the gallery could see them clearly. Messages with my name attached, timestamps, words that sounded threatening and cruel. He called his first witness, Lauren, who testified about Vanessa's fear, her tearful confessions, the bruises on her psyche, if not her body. Lauren was good. Her voice trembled at the right moments. Her answers felt unrehearsed. She talked about how Vanessa had become withdrawn, anxious, jumping at unexpected sounds. The gallery murmured sympathetically. Judge Hoffman took notes. Then Goldstein called Angela Morrison from my firm's HR department. She testified about concerns raised by Vanessa regarding my behavior at company events, my alleged misuse of resources, complaints filed through proper channels. She had documentation, emails, incident reports, a timeline that corroborated Vanessa's story. Everything looked official, procedural, damning. When Goldstein finished his questioning, he sat down with the satisfied expression of someone who'd proven his case beyond doubt. Judith stood for cross-examination, and her first question was simple. "Ms. Morrison, how many times did you meet with Lauren Hayes for lunch between April and August of this year?" Angela blinked. I'm not sure that's relevant." Judith smiled. "Let me help. Was it 6 times? 7. She placed a printed document on the evidence table, bank statements showing Lauren's payments from Vanessa's hidden account, with dates circled in red. "And were these lunch meetings related to your official HR duties, or were they strategy sessions?" Goldstein objected. Judge Hoffman sustained it, but the seed was planted. Angela's confidence had cracked just slightly. When it was our turn, Judith called Tom Briggs to the stand. He introduced himself calmly. 23 years as a private investigator, specializing in fraud and digital forensics. He didn't editorialize or dramatize. He simply presented the evidence in methodical sequence. First, the forensic analysis of the screenshots, pixel inconsistencies, metadata discrepancies, font rendering errors that proved digital manipulation. He displayed side-by-side comparisons on a laptop connected to the court screen, pointing out with a laser pointer exactly where the fabrications occurred. The timestamps on Vanessa's screenshots showed messages sent while I was verifiably elsewhere, in client meetings with documented attendees, on flights with purchased tickets, in video conferences with timestamp recordings. Then came the financial records. Tom walked through the transfers from our joint accounts to Vanessa's hidden account, the power of attorney that had enabled it, the payments to Kyle Pemberton and Lauren Hayes. He identified Kyle as an IT security specialist Vanessa had hired to help create the fake messages, and he presented signed testimony from the graphic designer who composited the screenshots, a young man named Aaron Chun, who'd kept all the original Photoshop files and was willing to provide them to the court. Goldstein objected 3 times during this testimony. Judge Hoffman overruled him each time, her expression shifting from patient attention to focused scrutiny. Judith called Kyle Pemberton next. He'd been subpoenaed and arrived looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Under oath, he admitted to helping Vanessa create digital evidence, initially believing her story that she needed documentation for a restraining order, then realizing too late what it was actually being used for. He'd kept the original files as insurance. Judith entered them in evidence. Metadata showing creation dates, edit histories, file names like fake_message_3_ revised.png. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the court reporter's keys and the occasional shift of weight in the gallery. When Vanessa took the stand in her own defense, her confidence from earlier had evaporated. Goldstein led her through a prepared testimony. The fear, the harassment, the financial control. But her answers sounded rehearsed now, hollow against the weight of forensic evidence. When Judah cross-examined her, the questions were surgical. Can you explain why messages you claim were sent on April 15th show metadata creation dates of May 2nd? Vanessa said she didn't understand metadata. Can you explain why you paid Kyle Pemberton $1,200 in June? Vanessa said it was for computer repair. Can you explain why you transferred $43,000 from joint accounts without your partner's knowledge despite the power of attorney being specifically for estate purposes? Vanessa's voice got smaller. She said she'd been protecting herself financially. Judith let the answer hang in the air before sitting down. Judge Hoffman called a 15-minute recess. When we returned, her demeanor had changed entirely. The patience was gone, replaced by something harder. She reviewed her notes for a long moment, then looked directly at Vanessa. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties," she said, her voice measured and clear. "The forensic analysis is compelling and raises serious questions about the authenticity of the documentation you provided. The financial records indicate a pattern of behavior inconsistent with your testimony. I'm dismissing your claims with prejudice and referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into possible fraud and perjury." The gallery erupted in whispers. Goldstein stood to object, but Judge Hoffman cut him off with a raised hand. Vanessa sat frozen at her table, Lauren beside her looking pale. I felt Judith's hand on my shoulder, brief, professional, and Tom gave me a small nod from behind us. It wasn't triumph I felt in that moment. It was something quieter, something closer to equilibrium. The truth hadn't exploded into the room. It had simply accumulated, line by line, detail by detail, until there was no more space for the lies. Judge Hoffman adjourned the hearing. People filed out slowly, processing what they'd witnessed. I gathered my things and walked out into the October afternoon. The fog burned away now, the sky clear and bright. 3 years have passed since that October morning, and I've learned that vindication doesn't erase what came before it. It just gives you permission to stop carrying it everywhere. I left the consulting firm 6 months after the hearing. Not out of bitterness, but pragmatism. Graham apologized, awkwardly and sincerely, but some bridges burned too thoroughly to rebuild. I started my own practice, smaller clients, projects I can manage alone, or with contractors I choose carefully. The work is steadier than I expected. Reputation, I've discovered, can be rebuilt if you're patient and consistent. 2 qualities I'd already spent months practicing. I moved to a different neighborhood, a quiet street near the river where people mostly keep to themselves. The house is smaller than the old one, just enough space for what I need. I run in the mornings now instead of going to the gym, following a loop along the water where the only sounds are footsteps and breath, and occasionally a heron taking flight from the shallows. The routines I built during those isolated months have mostly stayed with me, not because I'm still retreating, but because I learned I actually prefer the simplicity. Fewer people, deeper conversations, quality over performance. I heard through mutual acquaintances, the few who remain mutual, that Vanessa took a plea deal on the fraud charges, community service and restitution, no jail time. Her crowdfunding donors were refunded. Lauren moved to another state. Kyle Pemberton changed careers entirely. Last I heard, he was doing something with renewable energy. I don't follow up on these details deliberately. They just surface occasionally in conversation, ripples from a storm that's long since passed. When they do, I feel mostly nothing, maybe a distant curiosity about alternate timelines where different choices led different outcomes. Last month, I ran into Mrs. Cho at the farmer's market downtown. She recognized me immediately and started to apologize, stumbling over words about assumptions and believing the wrong story. I told her it was fine, which surprised her, but I meant it. She'd worked with the information she had at the time. Most people did. We talked about her grandchildren for a few minutes, and then went our separate ways, and it felt completely ordinary, which was its own kind of closure. The binder Tom compiled still exists in my filing cabinet, tucked in the back behind tax returns and insurance documents. I haven't opened it in over a year. Sometimes I think about throwing it away, but I don't, not because I need it for proof anymore, but because it represents something about transformation. Evidence that silence can be strategic, that patience can be powerful, that truth doesn't need volume to be heard. This morning I made coffee and watched the sun come up over the river, light spreading across the water in slow golden bands. The day ahead held meetings and work, and all the ordinary components of life, rebuilt from careful decisions. I closed the filing cabinet drawer without looking inside, picked up my keys, and walked out into clean autumn air that smelled like possibility and nothing else.